Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest of the Broadway Story. I'm your host, Clark.
And I'm Elijah. And in each episode, we're going to tell you something you may or may not have known about a Broadway show.
And if you can guess what show we're talking about before we end the episode, you win.
Today's subject is on a very serious matter in the world of theater.
Saying Macbeth?
No, Clark, no. Plagiarism.
Oh, right. Plagiarism is very different than taking someone's story for inspiration.
Right. You know, William Shakespeare was inspired by lots of things. Romeo and Juliet's a story about two lovers and feuding families. And that's very similar to English poet Arthur Brooke.
That's right. And West Side Story is about two lovers from rival gangs who fall in love. And it's based on Romeo and Juliet.
You know, there's a recent movie out called Warm Bodies. It's about a dead zombie guy who falls in love with a live human girl. Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story.
But we digress. Plagiarism is very, very serious, and the Broadway show today in question has not just one, but 3 counts of plagiarism.
The writer of today's show was already very famous when the show came out and when these claims came forward. So the power and the money was on his side.
But that did not stop people from saying, "Stop, thief, that's my song."
Or, "Stop, thief, that's my musical phrase."
Or, "Stop, thief, that's my descending half-tone chord progression."
The first claimant of today's show is the family of late composer Giacomo Puccini, who's famous for classics such as La Bohème and Madame Butterfly.
The family of Puccini claimed that the writer took a musical phrase from Puccini's aria, "Cielo che tacete." And I'm not so sure I said that correctly.
Sounds K. Bella to me, Clark. Anyway, the family settled out of court later and was settled out for an undisclosed amount.
Sounds like there might have been some plagiarism.
Might have been. The second claimant was a Baltimore songwriter named Ray Rep.
Ray had claimed that the writer took his melody from Till You, which was written 8 years before the show in question.
Yes, and 8 years later, the case dropped.
Do you think it was dropped because, well, everybody's heard of our famous writer today, but nobody's heard of Ray Rep?
Could have been. And the third case didn't even make it to court. He was already so famous.
That's right, and that famous claimant was none other than bassist, vocalist, and main lyricist for the band Pink Floyd, Roger Waters. Roger Waters claimed that the composer took from his song from his 1971 album Metal called Echoes.
But Roger Waters didn't officially sue. He figured life was too short.
And the other guy had already been knighted by the Queen, so why bother?
If you listen to the 2 tracks side by side, it's pretty obvious.
Stop, thief. That's my descending half-tone chord progression.
Think you know which Broadway musical we're talking about?
If not, we'll give you a few more clues. The story was based on a French novel, but written by Gaston Leroux.
And the plot revolves around a beautiful soprano who's the object of obsession of a disfigured musical genius.
Who lives in a labyrinth underneath the Paris Opera House.
If you think you know what the show is, it is
The Phantom of the Opera. And the composer is none other than Andrew Lloyd Webber.
All the tracks are on YouTube, so you can listen for yourself and decide if Andrew is a thief.
I, for one, became very suspicious when I listened to Pink Floyd's Metal album.
Yes, Clark, I've been a Ray Rep fan for years.
Join us next time in which we will reveal a fascinating story on The Rest of the Broadway Story.